All right. Look, today we have my big brother in the building, one of the greatest scholars and teachers of Israelite identity, of Hebraic thought. The mighty Hebrew is in the building with us today. Mighty Hebrew, first of all, let's take a moment and, uh, and give all praises to the God of Israel, as per usual. The God of our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the God of our fathers in this dispensation of time, our leaders who had led us back to the promised land under His Excellency Ben Ami and Prince Asiel and Prince Shaliach and all of the other elders, in other places in the world. We want to always give them that place of respect, for the great things that they've accomplished, and for laying the foundation for us to even have the chance to be able to speak today. But Mighty Hebrew, I want you to just first of all give a few words about yourself, because today we're going to be talking about a subject that is, in contention, right? A lot of people, I talk about it a lot on my pages, but I want you to talk about it also, as a Hebrew, as an Israelite, about this identity of Hebrew Israelites, where it comes from. There are people who say that this is not authentic. This is something that was made up. This is something from the 1960s and going forward. These are people who are trying to usurp Jewish identity, and because they don't really have an identity of their own. So first, I want you to start off by just sharing a little information about yourself, and then I have a few questions to ask you. I want to put you on the spot.
Absolutely. Hallelujah. First and foremost, I give all praise and honor to Yahweh, the supreme, intelligent, powerful one of our forefathers, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, those striving for righteousness' sake. I say unto the family, Shalom Aleichem. It's definitely an honor to be with you, Shot Greer, on this powerful show. I've been watching you. I went through everything you put up so far. Very interesting. I want to give a shout out to the African Palestinian sister. I think that was a real powerful, strong interview that you've done. Everybody affectionately know me throughout the world as the Mighty Hebrew. My real name is Prince Charlandine Ben Ami Montezorian Ben Israel, or Yasha Allah. I was appointed a prince back in 2016 by the late Shah Greer, International Ambassador, Prince Asiel Ben Shaliach Ben Israel, one of the founding fathers of the Kingdom of Yol, stationed in Dimona, Israel, Northeastern Africa. I've been in this way of life for over 34 years. I was in the school of the prophets under Nasik Eliashub ben Yehuda. I studied in the school of the prophets for 6 years, African Middle Eastern studies. I also got my degree in Hebrew fundamentalism by the late Prince Ram, that just recently made transition out in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, North Philly, in the area known as Hunting Park. I came under a Torah Center school known as Temple Kifraim under Prince Khazari Dar ben Israel. And then as time developed, I transitioned into the Kingdom of Yod. This is definitely a powerful subject that you're bringing up about the identity of the Hebrew Israelites. Many tackle that area going back into Mesopotamia, where you see in Bereshit or Genesis 14:13, we see Avram Ha'ivit. You see the word Abram, the Hebrew, and a lot of people align that to the forefather Eber that goes back to Genesis or Bereshit chapter 10, starting at verse 21 to 24, the root word for Hebrew being Eber, meaning beyond or ancient or to cross over. And I know a lot of people translate that word as one who crosses over, but in Hebrew, right? We see that yod at the end, that hard E sound at the end of the word Hebrew in Genesis 14:13. So if I say shalom, aki, I'm saying peace, my brother, or completeness, my brother. Shalom, akoti, I'm saying, completeness, my sister. Or shalom, adoni, completeness, my Lord. So when you see ivri, you're actually saying my crossing over, verse one who crosses over. And through my research, the Hebrews are more ancient than what we know in Mesopotamia. There was a region in the Indus Valley, roughly around 7,500 BCE, known as Or. And when one reads the biblical narrative in the Bereshit or Genesis chapter 11, we see that they speak of one language when the earth was one and they spoke one language. Well, the word, Ivri, Hebrew, the word eretz don't have to just be translated as earth, but it can be region, field, land. So the whole land was a one language or one speech or one thought process. And they came from the east. The Hebrew word for east is Kadim. Kadim is a Hebrew word also defined in the Indus Valley. And they found a plain known as Sinar. Sinar is the biblical term for Sumer. When you go outside of the biblical narrative to a record known as the Ramayana, it speaks about these ex-Brahmins or these Sumerian Hebrews known as the Yadavas leaving from the Indus Valley, going into Mesopotamia, establishing the Sumerian Empire for which Abraham comes from out of. So when we say that we're Hebrew Israelites, we're identifying our nationality and our tribal heritage simultaneously, because you'll hear arguments like, well, Hebrew is a language, not a people. But if you go to the book of Jonah, chapter 1, verse 9, when the people on the ship wanted to identify who Jonah was by questioning him, who he was, he called himself a Hebrew, and that he worshiped the power Yahweh of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, or Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Hebrew is, in fact, our national origin, our tribal heritage is Yisrael, because the Hebrew Yaakov or Jacob, whose name was changed to Yisrael, had 12 sons. You know the story. We see in it in the 35th chapter of Bereshit or Genesis, these 12 sons coming, thus becoming known as the children of Israel or the Hebrew Israelites. The word became popularized in the early 1970s when you had people such as Professor Rudolph R. Windsor, Rabbi Richard Nolan, Rabbi Hodges, Rabbi Divine, Prince Asiel, and many others. They came into a meeting in Chicago in the early 1970s to separate themselves from the modern term of Jew or Jewish, because every time we try to identify with something Eastern, those that had the power to define would label like they labeled the Nation of Islam, Black Muslims. So with us, they would say Black Jews, as if we were Johnny come lately. So what we wanted to do was distinguish ourselves, and we identified that mark from with the late Rabbi Arnold Josiah being the first documented Hebrew on record to say, we're not Jewish, we're Hebrews from the tribe of such and such, or from the tribe of such and such. So in the early 70s, it was stamped and sealed amongst leaders within our community, our nation, to say, we're going to stop using this term Jewish or Black Jew, and we're just Hebrew Israelites or Israelites. So that's how that came about.
So, but the question then would be, in that case, Prince, if these people came together in the 1970s to decide now that they no longer were going to use the term Black Jew or even want to be identified as Jewish, but they wanted to specifically identify according to the tribal heritage and the nationality, right? Mm-hmm. Which is different from just you subscribing to a religion or you being of, a specific heritage and also part of a specific religion, because we know that when we talk about one of the differences, mainly when we talk about identity, we're not talking about it just from a religious perspective. We're talking about it from a lineage. And when we talk about that lineage, right, not everybody are from the tribe of Judah. Not everybody resided in Judea. And so even though later on, those people who resided in Judea, the Judeans, the Levites, and a bit of the Benjamites, all of them then have become known as Judeans because they all resided in that area.
That's a fact.
but still at the same time, they still identified in accordance to their tribal lineage. But people will say today, then, okay, so because these were the only people who had actually survived after the destruction of the second temple and the destruction of the first temple, and so as such, everybody had become known as Jews, they say afterwards. So why do we have to identify as otherwise then, if that's the case?
That's a good question because when you look in the book of Hosea, starting at chapter 1 to chapter 6, we see the gathering of the northern kingdom of Israel, which took that name Israel because we know after the death of King Solomon, roughly around 930 BCE, we see this division of the nation of Israel. The southern kingdom becoming known as Yehowadah or Yehuda, the northern kingdom becoming known as Yasha'ala or Yisrael. So, but in the prognostication of things or the prophecy, we see that the southern kingdom or the southern stick and the northern stick or the northern kingdom, they're going to come together. We see this with the vision of Ezekiel with the valley of the dry bones. But I want to historically align this scattering of Israel with what is considered historically the Bantu expansion. When you see in the book of Exodus, we see that when Moshe goes up into the mountain and the children of Israel with Aaron, they build the golden calf of Hathor. We see that. And then we see when he came down that there was an opening of the earth and it swallowed up the people. For a long time, I'm like, what does this mean? Did the earth literally just open up and swallow all these thousands upon thousands of people? And as I continued to research more, this was a metaphor defining that the earth that was swallowing these children of Israel up for disobeying the command of Yah Yisrael was the first establishment of the scattering of Israel.
1 second, Mighty Hebrew. We're gonna have to stop for a second because the baby then woke up and you see her crawling over there.
Go ahead.
Give me 1 second.
Go ahead, handle that. Yep. So as I was saying, when you look at the story in the Shemot or the Exodus, we see after the golden calf was built, and the people said, "This is a feast unto Yahweh," which we know it wasn't a feast unto Yahweh. And when Moses came down, we seen the Levites rise up, started slaying, and we also see the earth opening up and swallowing the people into the earth. A lot of people not having understanding or the symbolic understanding of that story think the earth literally opened up and swallowed the people. The earth was the captivity or the dispersal of the first wave of Israelites running deep south into the body of Africa. This is why you will see a wave of Bantu tribes.
But let me stop you right there for a second, Prince. How do we know that? Is that because somebody may say, well, okay, this is your own interpretation.
Right. All throughout the Tanakh, we can see it in Isaiah, the second chapter. We can see it in Deuteronomy 28, Leviticus 26, and many other parts throughout the scripture that we will be scattered amongst the nations of the earth or the four corners of the earth. The swallowing itself would be the ideologies, the dogmas of the nations of the earth that we would lay waist deep in, even to the point taking on the identity of these people. This is why you might have Israelites in France, they call themselves French. You have Israelites in Britain, they call themselves British. You got Israelites in the United States, they call themselves Americans. This is the swallowing up of us going into the earth or the nations of the earth. This is what's taking place. But in this retrospect, it's the first wave of the Bantu expansion going throughout Africa. We're seeing a first wave a second wave, and a third wave. And we can tell by the way of older Israelite traditions versus newer Israelite traditions. And it's going back into your question about the Judean thing or labeling all Israelites, quote unquote, Jews. This is going to lead to that. So we see this first wave of Bantus. We can see them in many of the old traditions amongst the Tanzanians known as the Inyombo. The Inyombo of northern Tanzania teach that they scattered, right? They scattered during the time of Moses. Watch this. I want to give you a quick source real fast from the late Adonenu Rabbeinu Ben Ami Ben Yisrael HaMoshiach. And he says on page 14 in the book, God, the Black Man in Truth, many of the descendants of Abraham followed Moses from Egypt, but some of them remained in Egypt while others migrated south and westward. Stop. So either it was the spirit of Yahweh or Ben Ami has some type of knowledge of this first wave of the Israelites being scattered in the land of Egypt, 1446 BCE, before we even went into the land of the promise. We was already scattering in Africa amongst indigenous populations. He goes on to say, those migrating Hebrews explain why traces of Hebrew culture can be found throughout West, Central, and East Africa. Many scholars believe the ancestors of the Fulanti, Ashanti, Iwi, Yoruba, Bantu, and other people were in fact early Hebrew Israelites. God, the Black Man in Truth, page 14.
But that's from an Israelite, a Hebrew Israelite source.
Right. I like how you playing the devil's advocate, right?
Yeah, because I want us to be able to share it with them by the Hebrew. They don't know. They don't know you. You know,
right. I'm gonna bring that up, and I'm gonna bring that up in a second. I'm just showing that this thought didn't just start from me. I don't want to like make it seem like, oh, this is just something I discovered. No, we see a Hebrew scholar, one of the most, if not the most powerful Hebrew scholar in our midst, the late Adonenu, identifying that there was a mass exodus that took place during the Exodus going into South and West in Africa. And when we study the Bantu traditions, we see the earliest Hebrews are known as the Inyombo. And the Inyombo, Myambo. They're from northern Tanzania. I've seen them. I went to their community. And even though today they are Christians, they have oral traditions out of their own mouth saying that they are, in fact, Hebrews that was in the Horn of Africa before the Somalians even came. They're saying that they came during the time of the Exodus of Moses. This is what they're saying out of their mouth. So you can see the pre-Talmudic understanding of Torah, or what you would call pre-exilic Torah understandings with this specific community. So it's important to understand the first wave, the second wave, and the third wave of the Bantu expansion. So that's the first wave of the Bantu expansion. The second wave of the Bantu expansion, now we're seeing the kingdom of Israel becoming divided after the death of King Solomon. We see that there's internal strife, roughly, because we know that Solomon died 930 BCE. We can see that in the first book of Kings, the 11th chapter, 42, verse 42, that he reigned for 40 years. How do we know this? Because in first book of Kings, chapter 6, verse 1 to 4, we see during the fourth year of King Solomon's reign, 480 years after the Exodus, he started to build the temple. So we talk in 966 BCE. He reigned for 40 years, so he died 930. So having this understanding, we see that the kingdom became split, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. many of the northern kingdom wind up going into the Assyrian captivity. And when they went into the Assyrian captivity, many in the northern kingdom fled into Central Africa, East Africa, Western Africa, along with South Africa. You have sub-Zulu traditions that teach that the Zulus come by the way of Zebulon. You have very early Igbo traditions that's even, they speak of Iwi, which is one of the sons of Gad that they come out of. There's another Igbo tradition that says that the word Igbo goes back to Jeru or Jobar Igbo or Jerusalem. So we're seeing this northern kingdom connection with many of the Israelite tribes that still reside in Africa that haven't left. We see it. So this is the second wave. The third wave now, we see it after the destruction of the temple, 70 AD or 70 CE. We see people such as the man behind you that wrote the book, We the Black Jews. I see you have the book behind you, Bear Witness to the White Jewish Race Myth by Yosef A. Ben Yochanan on page 76. In his book, African Origins of the Major Western Religions, he speaks about the Cerinthian War, 115 ACE, that many of these Hebrews who are Negro, this is what he say out of his mouth, they got ran out of Rome, through Rome, out of their land, Israel, and they started to migrate into Ghana, Mali, and all these areas and started to amalgamate through diffusionism, these different ethnic groups that were already there and formulated the Ashanti, the Iwi, et cetera, et cetera. This is what he says. I want to read something real quick. I want to read an Alan H. Godbay's book, Lost Tribes of Myth, on page 245, who was a professor in Duke University in 1930. And he's not an Israelite. This is what he says. Yoruba Hebrews claim that their ancestors were driven from Oase to Oase and called themselves by the Hebrew name Bani Ephraim, which is in fact true. Now, why am I bringing that up? Because if you go to southern Nigeria right now, you will find a group in the Yoruba vernacular known as Imo Yom Korom. That means the strange people. That is where the indigenous population calls this particular group of 3,500 Hebrews that have been there for centuries. They call themselves Bnei Ephraim, or the children of Ephraim. This is their story. They say after the Assyrian occupation, many of them migrated from Oase to Oase until they landed in Timbuktu. They stayed there for a while, but there were hostile tribes that were around them. And then they wind up going into an area that wasn't known. And in the Yoruba vernacular, they called it the Omi, which means good water. Later on, that name shifted over to the coast and became known as Dahomey. They don't know how that name got there, but because of information being lost, but it got there. And later on, where they are located at, it became known as Nigeria. But out of their mouths, they say that before anybody was in their area, they were the first ones there. But then there was a rise of surrounding tribes, and they were a peaceful people that basically they were conquered. You know what I mean? And from there, because of the dominant tribes, they wind up going deep into like the jungle like areas and start living more of a bush life. But to this day, this is the key. They have a Hebrew Torah imparched in Aramaic. This is their story in Aramaic, and you can see it. That's over 2,500 years old. So this aligns with the Assyrian/Babylonian captivity, the Assyrian captivity that took place, and what they're identifying themselves as, because their language is a mixture of Yoruba and Aramaic. So we know that their story is aligning with this migration that is taking place. Because remember, whoever controlled the frankincense routes controlled life. And we're going to get into that in a second. But the third wave now is this. In Sheikh Anta Diop's book, Pre-colonial Black Africa, we talked about this a few days ago. On page 233, we have Tariq El-Fatah. Tariq El-Fatah was a historian that came out of Timbuktu, 1632. As a matter of fact, I see that you picked up the book. So could you, so they know, like, we're not just making it up, and could you show the listening audience the book, like the cover of the book, so that people can see? Yup, that's it right there. Pre-colonial Black Africa by Sheikh Anta Diop on page 233. Could you read that quotation to the family so we can see if there were eyewitnesses of the time at that time saying that there were Hebrews? And that also is going to debunk anybody that believes that the Hebrew community started in the United States in the 1960s. Tamshi.
So this is the last paragraph at the bottom. It says, according to the Tariq El-Fatah, an Israelite minority also lived in the bend of the Niger, region of Tendirma, and had made a specialty of cultivating vegetables watered with fresh well water instead of river water. This event must have been within the first millennium of the Hegira, but the date cannot be determined with precision.
So we see that there's an Israelite presence in West Africa amongst the Niger Bend. So we see this, and this is also substantiated by Professor Rudolph R. Windsor in his book, Judea Trembles Under Rome. We see that along with From Babylon to Timbuktu. Also, I would like to read not just, from our scholars, I would like to read a quotation from Mary Benson's book, Nelson Mandela, the Man in the Movement, on page 17. She says, at home, he, meaning Nelson Mandela, as a child heard of a more recent event not taught in history lessons on how in 1921, General Smuts, prime minister, had sent an army which massacred 163 men, women, and children at nearby Borhoek in the Eastern Cape, members of an Israelite sect. They have refused to move from the common ground on which they were camping. Let's stop right there, because that's very important. This is very important. Now, who are these people? There was a man by the name of Prophet William S. Crawley. Back in 1902 or 1902 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where he had on Lombard and South the tabernacle, he appointed and anointed a South African man by the name of Bishop Charles M. Mason. Bishop Charles M. Mason goes back to South Africa to identify who the Israelites were in South Africa. And he started to create these African Zionist tabernacles all throughout Johannesburg and these different areas. There was a man that came out of that in 1907 by the name of Prophet Enoch. Later, Prophet Enoch became Torah Center and created a community known as the Israelites. And they had a big compound and a large community. And in 1921, they were executed by the apartheid regime that was there at that time. To say all this is way before 1960. This is way before 1960. We see a United States connection with an African connection of Israelites in the United States and Israelites in Africa. And if we want to dive deep, we can go into 1798. A good book for the listening audience to go get is a book known as Israel on the Aftermaths. And it speaks about runaway slaves that created the Israelite community in Virginia known as Israel Hill. And they're saying people such as Nat Turner and you had others that were influenced, such as Prophet William S. Crawley, Prophet F.S. Cherry or Frank S. Cherry, they was influenced by this community. So you got Israel Hill in 1798. You're seeing different Hebrews. We got old man Billy Simmons. We got who literally taught that he was an Israelite and he was speaking Hebrew, and his teaching was that his ancestry came from Madagascar. And we see Professor Rudolph R. Windsor speaking about the Israelites of Madagascar and from Babylon to Timbuktu, known as the Rakab. The Rakab was a sub-clan from out of the tribe of Judah. Now, how is it? Yeah. You matter of fact, you can pull that up real quick, and you're going to see a section known as the Madagascar Jews. Absolutely. Now, I want to speak real quick in defense of Rudolph R. Windsor while you're looking for the Madagascar Jews. A lot of those in the Black conscious community try to discredit the book From Babylon to Timbuktu, for whatever their reasons may be. But they say certain things contradict one to another. Nothing in the book contradicts itself. From Babylon to Timbuktu was Professor Rudolph R. Windsor doing the same exact thing as Professor Joseph J. Williams did, who he was a professor and he also was a Jesuit, and he put together the book Hebrewisms of West Africa. And in that book, it was based on a comparative study of different scholars over the centuries saying different things about the Hebrew presence in Africa. And at the end, Professor Joseph J. Williams say this out of his mouth. This is what he determined. I just want to read this quotation from Joseph J. Williams and his conclusion of the whole subject matter. Let me see if I have his quotation here, because it's very important that the people, yes. So this is what he says on page 23. He says, long before the destruction of Jerusalem by Titus, the Mediterranean shore of Africa had become lined with influential Hebrew colonies, which undoubtedly were in constant mercantile relations with the interior of the Dark Continent. But Egypt especially had been a haven of the refugees from Jerusalem at the time of the Babylonian captivity, and for many subsequent centuries, the Hebrew element in the land of the pharaohs continued to increase. So you're seeing this Hebrew increasement all throughout what we know as Northern Africa, Northeastern Africa, and started to push into the body of Africa. In this last quotation that he said, I want to get that last quotation from him from beyond, because I feel as though that is definitely
I got the piece. I got the piece, by the way, of the Jews of the Malagasy Republic.
Good, that's perfect. Matter of fact, read that real fast because I have to find that quotation. Could you read that?
Okay, so I'll start at the well. It's really just one paragraph. So it says, there's an island near the southeastern coast of Africa called the Malagasy Republic. The old name for this island was Madagascar. Near the eastern part of this island, on the Isle of Saint Marie, there exists a group of Black Jews who call themselves Zafin Ibrahim, descendants of Abraham. Professor Alan H. Godbey says that the same alphabetic writings that was present in Palestine about 650 BC appeared at the same time in Malaysia.
Stop. Notice it's going to that Assyrio-Babylonian captivity. That's showing the second wave of the Bantu expansion. And notice that they call themselves the descendants of Abraham. Notice how they're using these ancient terminologies before you even see the destruction of the temple, etc. So this is more of the northern kingdom of Israel pushing in. Continue on. You can continue because it's only one paragraph.
Moreover, he says, since the Hovas of Madagascar are members of the Malayan family who probably immigrated from Cambodia, this indicates the historical connection with the Jews of Madagascar. Like the Jews of Ethiopia, Uganda, and Wasambara, there are a multiplicity of Jewish cultural survivals, complexes, patterns, and traits found functioning among the Jews of Madagascar, such as the following: the day counted from sunset to sunset, many fast days, the eating of beef, the New Year festival, the making of a small fire on the first evening of the feast. They have rituals of the purification of the people. They sprinkle blood of the New Year's ritual upon the doorposts. The latter ritual could be reminiscent of the Passover ceremony, which is observed in the month of Aviv. This month,
Stop. Stop. Notice that they're literally still doing that. Whereas we're not doing that today because we're from the Southern Kingdom. So you understand? So that we became more codified in our understanding of Torah, whereas though they still kept that oral tradition. So every Pesach HaKak Matzah that came, they're literally taking blood of the lamb and sprinkling it. The point that I'm expressing is that first Bantu expansion wave and that second Bantu expansion wave, we can see it in older Israelite traditions throughout Africa. The fairly newer traditions we see amongst many of the Southern Kingdom in West Africa and going into the transatlantic slave trade. So it's very important for us to study the Bantu expansion and align it with the scattering of Israel starting during the Exodus, then the Assyria, Babylonian captivity, and then from there, the Greco-Roman captivity. Yeah, we was in the Medo-Persian captivity, but remember, Cyrus rose up and started letting remnants of the Southern Kingdom come back into the land of Israel. So
that's what built the second temple.
that's a fact. So you're not going to see, and notice what you read, they didn't give no type of Talmudic references. So you can clearly see that these people were strictly Torah observant, and you can go visit them today. They're still there to this day, that Pacific community.
Now, let me ask you, Matty Hebrew, because you've really given us, you've given us a well of knowledge, right? You've given us the historical migration patterns of these peoples, and we can be able to also go, like you said, and confirm these things in books. And we could do it, on our own. We could, but then the question becomes then, right? Okay, these people migrated into Africa. Most likely they migrated into other places also in the world. But what type of connection can we make between the people who identified themselves as the descendants of these people who we're talking about, who arrived into the Western Hemisphere, some who were taken to North America, some who were taken into the islands of the Caribbean, and those who were taken into South America? How could we be able to draw a direct link between the people who had migrated during the period of the Assyrian invasion or after the period of the Babylonian and the Roman invasion, right? Those people who had migrated into North Africa, we know that a significant amount of them also settled along the Niger River.
That's a fact.
In Western Africa. So that would be, all of those Western African countries, like you had mentioned. Today there'll be Ghana and Benin and Togo, and so all of those places, Senegal. We know that people were taken from there into the Americas to be enslaved and into Europe. But how do we draw a direct link between those people? How can we say that these are the same people? Because there's some people who also say, and I'm purposely saying this, Mighty Hebrew, because I want you to bring that information to the people. There's some people who say, because clearly we were there also before Columbus arrived, right? So we had already been there. We had already established ourselves there. We had people who were continuing to also practice those customs and those traditions. But they say that those are the people who are mostly probably the Native American tribes, some of the Native American tribes. But what about those people who were taken from the western shores of Africa and for 400 years were disconnected from their roots, from their ancestry, from their religion, from their mores, from their folkways? They couldn't practice any of their traditions. So how will we know that these are the same people?
That's a good, That's a very, very good question. Very good question and easy answer. One of the things, first, I'm going to give a quick answer from Dr. John Henrik Clarke, which is he's an excellent scholar. If y'all haven't heard from John, who Dr. John Henrik Clarke is, he's also the cousin of Morey Yoel ben Israel. And I know you know Morey Yoel. You heard that that's his cousin. So I want to read an introductory piece out of Alfred J. Butler's book, The Arab Conquest of Egypt in the Last 30 Years of the Roman Dominion. Dr. John Henrik Clarke says Roman exploitation, taxation, and ruthlessness caused a lot of the original Africans in North Africa to move further into the body of Africa. The question is often asked, what happened to North Africa's Black population? This is part of the answer. Now, one can argue and say, well, he said North Africans. He didn't say who they were. Well, if we go to Notes for an African World Revolution, Africans at the Crossroads on page 276, we see Dr. John Henrik Clarke now identifying these North Africans by saying there is a need now to study the migration of the Jews correctly, the Israelites of the southern kingdom of Israel, after 70 AD, when the Romans destroyed their temples and started the dispersal of the Israelites of that day of the southern kingdom. Where indeed did they go? There is some evidence, this is what Dr. John Henrik Clarke says, there is some evidence that some of them migrated south into the body of Africa. So we have one of the grandfathers of Afrocentric school of thought telling us to study the migrational patterns of these people. Earlier, that's what we did. So when we start talking about people that went into the transatlantic slave trade, we are not of the Israelite mind state that every slave that was on that slave ship was an Israelite. We're not naive. We're historians and we're truth seekers. We know from the record that many places like Jamaica, Cuba, Hispaniola, these were breaking points where there was a separation that took place, like amongst the Coromantes, who were Israelites that were separated and later became known as the Maroons. And they were separated from other, African tribes. How do we know? Because when we study the Coromantee culture, we can see that it comes from out of the pages of the book of Leviticus. We can see certain cross-cultural exchanges. But the difference from the Black Americans versus the other slaves that came in the islands is that the Black Americans didn't start from West Africa to the islands and then to the Americas or the United States. They came straight from West Africa to the United States, Jamestown, Virginia, 1619. You made mention in one of your presentations about slavevoyages.com. And when you go to slavevoyages.com, when we look at the names of these slaves that came to the United States, they got Hebrew names. And then when you see these Hebrew names, not only that, there are old churches that go back to slavery times that they found writings carved or in parts in the seats or the wooden tables and chairs of this church of Hebrew writings, saying the Creator's name. And not only that, the most powerful and strongest Israelite presence throughout the world we see in the United States. We see in the United States this grassroots movement of Israelites rising, whether you're talking about the folklore of us singing about Jerusalem, we wasn't identifying with the Niger River or the Nile Valley, none of that. We were identifying ourselves with being in Jerusalem. And even when you look at what you know as Freemasonry, even in the mystery of Hyman Mabiff, they're letting you know who Israel is. The story of Hyman Mabiff is that he was knocked in the head at high noon amongst three ruffians and buried in the western gate of King Solomon's temple. So what's the symbolic symbolic understanding of this. Haimim Abiff symbolically is the nation of Israel. Knocked in the head at high noon, knocked unconscious of who we are as Israel. The three ruffians is Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. Knocked us in the head at high noon, buried us in the shallow grave of the western gate of Solomon's temple. The shallow grave of the western gate is the western hemisphere. The shallow grave is us being, engulfed in Western liberal democracy. So even in Freemasonry, we see the symbolism of Israel coming into North America, mainly the United States. We also see in Freemasonry that a star shall rise in the east. If we read Prince Gabriel or Prince Gabriel Hagedorn's book, The Impregnable People, we see that within the Masonic literature that they identified, Prince Hall and all of them absolutely identified themselves as Israelites. Before they was even looking towards Kemet, the founding fathers of Prince Hall Freemasonry understood that they were Israelites. That's why when you see those such as Crawley and Cherry and all of them, or Masons, they weren't identifying themselves as Masons, identifying with Egypt, but they was identifying with Jerusalem. That's what they was identifying with. So when we look at the presence of the United States so-called Negro, they are the ones that hold the central key. Also, Zechariah chapter 12, verse 7 said that the tents of Judah would be first. And when we look carefully, it has always been a fact that the slaves in the United States were the first to openly identify themselves as Israel. We see this with Denmark Vesey. We see Frederick Douglass, even though it is said that his father wasn't an Israelite, his mother was an Israelite, but he was absorbed in the dominant culture at the time that was around him. The dominant culture would have been that Black American culture. The same with Bob Marley, but he was from Jamaica, even though his father was Irish and his mother was a Benjamite or Jamaican. You see what I'm saying? He identified himself with the dominant culture. Because I know one can argue and say, well, Frederick Douglass' father, he wasn't an Israelite, so he wasn't an Israelite. That may be true, but we're talking about the dominant factor which influenced him to identify the so-called Negro as the children of Israel. We even see Marcus Garvey calling the Black men in the United States the children of Israel. We can go to the book Our Savior Has Arrived by Elijah Muhammad, where he's calling the so-called Negro the children of Israel. We see Malcolm X's autobiography identifying with Genesis 15:13, us coming to a strange land, for 400 years, and saying that the most honorable Elijah Muhammad taught him that the Black men in America were the children of Israel. Now, we wasn't in slavery in ancient Egypt, 1446 BCE, for 400 years. We sojourned in Egypt for 430 years. Only half of that, 210 years, we were slaves, or better yet, Avev. We were indigenous servants in the land of Kemet for 230 years. But we talking about a 400-year captivity. And if we start to identify when we came, and then we look at the awakening of the kingdom of Yah, if one wants to look at it from there, that's 400 years. This is when we started to make that mass exodus back to the land by the way of Liberia, the wilderness, 1967, breaking them niggatudes from out of us. 1969, we returned to the land, and what's very deep about that, we were stationed in Dimona. When you go into Joshua chapter 15, verse 22, one of the towns of the southern kingdom or Judah was in fact Dimona. We see the land Dimona being mentioned right there in Joshua chapter 15, verse 22. And is this a coincidence that we will return back to the same area where the southern king? This is not a coincidence. Now, I know there's arguments that we were strategically put in Dimona because of the nuclear reactor and different things of that nature. But we understand this to be prophetic. We understand this to be prophetic. So not only do we have history behind us, an anthropogenesis, a cosmological understanding, but we also have prognosticated events that is aligning ourselves. But those that were a part of the event itself, they wouldn't be able to see it because they are part of the event. Versus us, we are the effect of the event. So for us, it's crystal clear, like, wow, that happened. But those that will participate in within this mass exodus that you yourself were born from out of, okay, they couldn't see it because they were the participants of something that I don't even believe they had that in-depthness or what they was involved in into after effect. So we see this mass climaxing, so to say, of us coming out of Egypt land, becoming a monarch, breaking down into the northern kingdom, the southern kingdom. We see the prognostications of Deuteronomy chapter 28, 15 to 68, that we were coming to a strange land. Don't Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 36 and 37 tell us, I will send you and your king into a strange land, which neither you nor your fathers have known, and there you will worship idols, even wood and stone, and I will make you an object of horror, a proverb and a byword amongst the nations of the earth. You drop to the 68th chapter, which has been mistranslated in the King James Version. It says, I will bring you back into Egypt again in ships, right? Now, when you look at the word Egypt, we see the word Mizraim. And some people translate that word to meaning two kingdoms, meaning upper Kemet and lower Kemet. That's a mistranslation. The word Mizraim means over troubling waters. It's a compound, Mizraim and Yam. Mizraim is like something troublesome, awful, dreadful. In the Hebrew, Yam is water. So it says, verse saying, I will bring you back into Egypt with ships. It should properly translate, I will send you by the way of ships over troubling waters. The troubling waters was the transatlantic slave trade and us going from West Africa across the Atlantic Ocean. And then it says, you will never see again, meaning those that were on them ships, they wouldn't never see their land. And you will be sold to your enemy as bondmen and bondwomen. And they got there, no man shall buy you, but correctly, no man shall save you. No man shall save you. So when you have people that try to go into the writings of Josephus and try to say, yeah, we took them from Jerusalem and, or Rome, and they put us in ships and we went to Egypt and things like that, that might be well and true. But we also acknowledge that there is duality in prophecy. We know this. So when we look at the bigger picture and the scope of things, nobody fits these prognostications like the Black American. Nobody. Or the West Indian Negro. Nobody. The Black British from Britain. Nobody. Nobody fits the prognostication that we see Israelites being colonized in Africa and taking on these new names. And now we're seeing the separation of the righteous from the wicked, the chosen from the non-chosen with these diasporan wars and different things that you're seeing going on. The kingdom of Yah had to be established. Another thing I want to remind the people, and even those that's watching this from the kingdom of Yah, remember what the Father said in the lecture of Return to the Absolute. He said there's going to be many that's going to come to this kingdom, meaning in Dimona, that they're going to be speaking the kingdom too. So you're going to have this wave of Israelites looking towards brothers and sisters such as yourself, myself, and others. So there's a bunch of evidence that there was a migrational pattern of Israelites that went deep into the body of Africa. And if we are to understand the prophecy, The Most High said, I will scatter you amongst all the nations of the earth. So if he said that, why is it hard for people to believe that Israelites migrated into Africa? We was not influenced by Judaism. That was later. When you look at for instance, the Igbo and their oral traditions, before they became influenced by Jewish or Judaism, they was already upholding the Hebrew culture. We see this with Beta Israel, or the house of Israel, in Ethiopia and in Israel. That term falasha, meaning stranger, is an Aramic word that's a derogatory word. They was calling themselves Beta Israel because in their tradition, they teach that Zodok the priest, or King Solomon had a child with Makeda, the queen of Sheba, who had Menelik the first, which means from the king. And from that, 1,000 from each of the 12 tribes came with Zodok the priest and formulated the Beta Israel, or the house of Israel. But the Jewish world established them as the tribe of Dan. But their traditions say that there are amalgamation of remnants of all the 12 tribes of Israel. Before the kingdom even split into two, there was already an Israelite populace in Ethiopia. So for us to try, and I'm not saying us, but those that are of our same ethnogenesis background and those that are outsiders, trying to say that we're just trying to identify ourselves as Israelites because of slavery, the influences of the Bible. Well, I would like to read this quotation real quick to counter that. And and I found that in Joseph J.
The quotation you're about to read is from where?
Oh, from what book?
Yeah.
The quotations that I'm getting this from is from our brother Sar Ahmadiel ben Yahuda, who created the African Edenic Heritage Museum. He has a book called The African Edenic Heritage, Exploring the African Presence in the Promised Land, excerpts and commentary from the African Edenic Heritage Museum, a travel and photographic and research expedition by Sar Ahmadiel ben Yahuda. So, and give a shout out to Sar Ahmadiel ben Yahuda, who is one of the most greatest historians within the 20th and 21st century. He says, well, he doesn't say this, but he quotes it. He quotes Joseph J. Williams' book, Hebrewism of West Africa, From Nile to Niger with the Jews, on page 355. It states, this is the conclusion of Joseph J. Williams' book, Hebrewisms of West Africa, where he was doing a comparative study of all these different scholars trying to find out how is this Hebrew presence in West Africa. This is his conclusion. Somewhere in the dim past, a wave, or more probably a series of waves. Remember, I was talking about them 3 Bantu expansions, right? It says a series of waves of Hebraic influence swept over Negro Africa, leaving unmistakably traces among the various tribes, whether they have endured even into this present day. Also, in the same book, right? In the same book, in the book, The Black Song, The Forge and the Flame, on pages 31 and 32 by John Lavelle Jr., it says, if the American white man fancies that he was the first to teach the Bible to his black slave, he is quite mistaken. Mungo Park, as affirmed by Marlon L. Stokely, found that Fantuma, the Catholic schoolmaster, had Arabic versions of the Pentateuch, or the Torah, the Psalms of David, and the book of Isaiah. The unlearned Mandinkas entertained him with stories of Joseph and his brethren, Moses, David, and Solomon. They gave out the stories as part of their own folklore and were very much surprised to learn that white men had heard of them. If many slaves already knew a great deal of the Bible, the whole pattern of the origin and development of the backgrounds of the spiritual in America will have to be reconsidered. So we have European explorers going into West Africa, sitting amongst Mandinkas, identifying themselves as the children of Israel before slavery even came about. So, I mean, how do they answer these things? They're just going to say, oh, that's made up. They just want to say that's made up. Even there now, I don't know if you know about it, but I believe you do. There was over 700 manuscripts that just been found within the past 10 years in Mali and in Timbuktu.
I didn't hear about those. Share
Yeah,
with.
yeah. There's the next time you have me on the presentation, I have the information directly for you. But in these manuscripts, it talks about the Hebrew presence in West Africa and the families of many of these tribes in West Africa. And it's in these 700 manuscripts that they have, but it's all written in Arabic. It's all written in Arabic. And I'm gonna get the links for you so you can go over it, because a lot of it has been translated and it gives you the families. We've been last year we was posting it heavy on Facebook and throughout social media. So not only did they find manuscripts in Timbuktu of the Hebrew presence, we even see Askisa the Great, the Songhai Empire, that made a decree about the Israelites in Mali and the repercussions of openly upholding the Hebrew Israelite culture, because Islam became dominant in the mind of these sultans that sat on these West African thrones. Because at the time when the trading route or the frankincense and myrrh trading routes were took control by the sultans of the Moroccan Empire, the only way that you can be a part of that money that was coming through the trading route, you had to convert to Islam. So many of these Israelite princes, known as the Zad dynasty, Z-A, some people spell it D-I-A, from Za el Yemen, that came, which means that which come from Yemen. Many of us migrating from northeastern Africa into West Africa, we started to create these kingdoms, and later on, we converted to Islam. So this is just historical facts.
Right, Hebrew. I don't think that you left no stone unturned.
Right.
And it was important for, I mean, I'm sure we could actually go on with this, and we're gonna do some,
Absolutely.
part 2, 3, 4, so that people can be able to really get the genesis of our identity, right?
Absolutely.
Where does it actually come from? Because it doesn't, just start where usually we read it in the Bible, Ur of the Chaldeans, and then moving forward and then coming forward.
Right.
There's so much more information that people just not familiar with. And
Right.
so they will probably even think at times that their identity is a development from, some religious fanaticism that people may have, right? That is the only place where you can be able to find anything that remotely relates to our identity if you're looking at it in the Bible. And so some people don't even believe in the biblical writings. So as far as they're concerned, that's all folklore, that's all nonsense, it's made up information. And the people who are identified as this today, this is just a new identity for them, because they want to have an identity because they don't have an identity. These people came from so many different places, uh, in Africa and otherwise, and were forced to become one people, right, under the slave master. And so, as far as the slave master was concerned, all he knew was that these were Black people. He didn't know the differences between the 200 plus different peoples who would come on those ships, right? He couldn't be able to identify. And even today, most people who would look at African people, you look at somebody from Zimbabwe and somebody from South Africa and somebody from Nigeria and somebody from Ethiopia, most likely you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between these peoples, right? Unless you look at their cultural patterns. Maybe at times you may be able to look at their facial features, but even at times, because a lot of people have also commingled, then some people look like people from the other places. I mean, because somewhere along their family lineage, they commingle with people from other places in Africa. And so now they look like just normal Africans. They may even have DNA markers of just, African peoples or whatever, but that doesn't necessarily say that this is where they're originally from. And so
That's a fact.
I think that it was important for us to at the least lay the foundation to be able to help people to see that our identity is so founded, right? That we know who we are, but it was just a renaissance of that information. Because following the 400 years of enslavement, the majority of the limelight were on the people who were in the Western hemisphere.
Mhm.
But all it takes is for you to just go back to the Western shores of Africa. There are a lot of people who were not taken on those
That's a
ships,
fact.
and they're
That's a
still
fact.
there. They've been practicing ever since. They saw the people, getting taken away or whatever. And this wasn't that long ago. I mean, we're talking about just about a few hundred years ago. So the people who are still there, these people still hold on to these traditions, and they can be able to show you writings and information and archaeological findings and things like that that can be able to prove to you that these people know who they are and what they are, and the oral traditions that they have maintained. That's just on the West Coast. But we're talking about the Limba down in South Africa as well. They know who they are. The Beta Israel Ethiopian, they know who they are. We have those who are also in North Africa, but also inside of right in the heart of sub-Saharan Africa, right? I mean, because when you look at people like Eldad the Danite, for example, who had brought that information about what he had discovered and where he was from, to people who had no idea that we even existed in the belly of Africa. People have no idea, Mighty Hebrew. But
And,
I
and,
think
and,
that
and
go ahead.
the thing I wanted to express when you were saying how, and I'm gonna show this another time if you have whenever you have me come back on. If you go to the book Hebrewisms of West Africa, also a book known as Lost Tribes and Myth, you will see old 18th century, 17th century maps of West Africa, of them identifying who Israel is and who's not. So these people knew,
Yes.
they knew, like when they went into Africa, who was Israel and who wasn't. If not, how was it that they had these maps during the time of the transatlantic slave trade to identify these people? Where did
Yes.
these maps come from? These maps weren't just made up. These maps right now are at Duke University and other areas, excuse me, and other universities where we can go and look at them ourselves. And they go back to the 17th century, the 18th century. How is it that they identifying these people? When you go and I mean, literally, you've seen the maps and Hebrewism. How is that? How do they know this? How do they know? They got their Negro Jews, Moorish Jews, whoop, 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 this. And then they got this big map of Africa and they're identifying who Israel is in these regions. And then when you go to these regions today, Israel is there.
Yes,
So,
sir. Yes, sir. Well, by the Hebrew, I think we gave a world of information today to the people to be able
yes,
to, at the least, be exposed to you and to your greatness and to your scholarship and to how dedicated you are to. I mean, because for us, it's really not a debate, right? We're not looking to debate anybody, but what we are
right.
looking to do is to bring this information to the forefront. One, to be able to edify our own people, right? It's not enough just to know who you are, but the history is also very important because if you don't know your roots, then you are liable to just get plucked up.
Yes, sir.
And so in the age like this where it's important to bring that information to the forefront so that people can have a better understanding. I don't think that people are doing it. Most people, I don't think that they're actually doing it purposely to try and to dismiss our identity. They just don't know. Most people don't know. Now you have those people who do know, who are purposely trying to dismiss it because they have a purpose behind that. But the majority of the people are just sheep. They just go along with things they've heard. Most people haven't even gone into the records. They haven't read even one book about it. They haven't really delved into the information at all. So it's not even worth having a conversation with them. That, we have to tell them these are the books that you need to go study first of all before we can even have a conversation. You go and look into it, right? But for the people who are just not familiar and who are interested in finding out more about this, I think this is a great place to be able to actually start to provide to them, records and information and resources to be able to direct them to where they could be able to actually start at. Right? You start here, and then we could be able to bring you up to speed on where we are at this moment in time, because didn't just pop up out of nowhere. And so, Mighty Hebrew, I just want to thank you again for coming on the platform. This is a new platform. I'm just, establishing
Absolutely.
it or whatever. So, but I see that the people are really gravitating to the information on the platform, and I think it's important to have a brother like you. So I give you, some closing words, Mighty Hebrew, and then we're gonna get out of here.
Uh, Giving all praise and honor to Yahweh, the supreme, intelligent, powerful one, of our forefathers, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, those striving for righteousness' sake. Shalom Aleichem. It was an honor to be here with you, Ambassador Azriel. Everybody that's watching this, subscribe to this channel. Subscribe to this channel, you know what I mean? Because this brother is definitely on the front line, and y'all see him. To us, you're a national hero to us, because you have not only shown the state of Israel, but also the world our presence. And we need more brothers and sisters like yourself that's pushing forward and upward. It's just an honor that I'm on the show with you, and I look forward to coming back. And with that, I say Lala Tov, Shalom Aleichem.
I tell my brother, hey, buddy, I love you, man.
Love you too, man.
I love you.